Hey, what's up? It's Jordan here. In this video, I'm gonna run through my top 10 plugins for metal engineers. These are plugins that I've been using for many years. I wouldn't want to live or mix without them. And some of these plugins can be had for well under $100. So let's jump right in without any further ado. In no particular order, these are my top 10 plugins for metal engineers. Gonna kick it off with a plugin that's been my favorite go-to for probably almost 10 years. It's the SSL channel from Waves. I know there are a couple other companies with versions of this, but this is just the one I tried first and I'm super used to it. It allows me to work fast. And the thing I love about it is that I just love turning knobs instead of, graphic EQs like this. I mean, I still use these for surgical moves, but there's just something psychological about, boosting 12 dB or something at, 10K. It's just kind of freaky on a graph like that. But if you do it here and you just turn a knob up, it's like no big deal, right? You just turn it till it sounds good. That's what that plugin allows me to do. And it sounds great. It has that kind of hard hitting, kind of edgy sound to it, especially when you push the EQs and the compressor. The compressor, by the way, is great. Use it for drums and vocals, definitely on the slow attack for drums and the fast attack for vocals. You can do a lot of gain reduction and it gives you that aggressive kind of character that's been, a standard go-to for rock and heavy records throughout the years, even when it was the old SSL consoles. And now they've done a good job at capturing the same thing in this plugin. And you can see I've got it like on not every single track here, but almost every drum track. I've got it on bass, I've got it on guitars. It's basically my go-to EQ. So that's the first one on the list, the Waves SSL channel. Next up, I haven't been using this quite as long, but it's the Waves CLA 76. So it's their 1176 emulation. It's got the Blackie and Bluey built in. This compressor is super awesome for screaming and aggressive singing vocals. Let's check it out here.
Sinking below till my lungs go. Let the tide come and carry me home.
I love to throw this on a vocal and just like with the blue edition, just really slam it. I don't care how much gain reduction it's doing. It's just when we get that kind of punch and edge to the vocals, and it also adds a nice character and color to the sound, as well as helping obviously control the dynamics. There's pretty much not another go-to vocal compressor that I use. That's almost on every single one of my vocal mixes. All right, number 3, we're continuing with the Waves theme here. This is the L1 limiter. This plugin's been around forever, but I just love what it does. I love the way it can really just sit a track right where it needs to be in the mix. So, I just picture it like cutting off kind of the top end peaks of the sound and just in that way really containing a source, just sitting it exactly where you want it to stay in the mix. So for that reason, I'll use it a lot on vocals.
Sinking below till my lungs.
Usually not doing a ton, but just enough to just contain the sound in a really nice way. And it's also just got a certain character that just really works for heavy music as a limiter. So I wouldn't recommend that on drums because you're going to lose some of the transient. You see I don't have it anywhere here on drums, but definitely for bass, it can just kind of really, again, you can use it to kind of chop off the spiky transients of something like a bass or guitar or vocal, but you can also use it to just squeeze it a little bit and just contain it like I was saying. So that's number 3, the Waves L1 limiter. Been using that for many years as well. All right, we're going to switch up into some Slate plugins here. Going to start with just kind of the overall bucket of Slate plugins, which is their virtual mix rack. And this is something that's relatively new for me. I haven't always used these plugins. I mean, they haven't been around as long as the Waves ones, but I'm starting to get more and more into these plugs. Now, currently, I'm not really using, their EQ models with the SSL and everything because I'm so fast and used to the Waves SSL, and I know exactly how it's going to respond. So I prefer to work fast. I prefer not to try to replace my plugin workflow for no reason. But some of the other modules in here are great, like this distressor module. If I ever get a vocal that wasn't tracked with compression on the way in and I need to even out the dynamics before I go to my normal vocal mix processing, I'll throw this on because it sounds almost exactly like my hardware distressor that I always track vocals with. So this gets me a vocal sounding as close as possible to what it would sound like if I had tracked it and used the distressor. So it's a really good model of that. I'm not going to go through every module in here because there's tons, but I'll just show you what I'm using mostly. I'm really liking this Air EQ. It's sounding pretty good. Just adding some high-end sparkle and even a little bit of kind of crack element to a snare drum. That's kind of one of my secret weapons right now. And where I'm really relying on this Slate virtual mix rack is with the saturation right now. I'm loving these Hollywood, London, and New York saturation modules. You just put them on, turn it up till it sounds good. You know, some of them give more of a kind of fat, low mid element to the sound. Some of them give a little bit more bright edge. Some of it just fills it out kind of more overall. So I usually try those out on drums, guitars, just to try and add a little bit more life and size to source tracks. So the virtual mix rack, I mean, it's probably, at least on a monthly basis, one of the cheapest options of all the plugins I'm showing you here. I think it's like 15 or 20 bucks a month. And not only do you get that, you get all of the Slate plugins, and some of those are going to be coming up in this list, including the next one I'm going to name here, which is the Slate Verb Suites Classics plugin. This is really great. The presets are really good to begin with. I mean, the CLA snares I love. The different room sounds that they have as well are really good. It's just basically like, I used to have all these different plugins that I liked, like the Waves IR plugin and some really good impulses that I've used there, and just some other good reverb plugins too, Valhalla. But this one seems to have all of them in one plugin, and for that reason, it's really easy. And I also love that it has the low, mid, and high EQs built into the plugin. That helps a lot, and the width controls and everything is also, can be super useful. So this has kind of become my go-to reverb plugin. I've gone back and replaced all my other reverbs in my mix template with that one. So again, with the Slate Everything bundle, you get all these plugins. This is one of them. Super cheap monthly fee. So I would definitely really recommend it. This is a great sounding reverb. Here's the snare plate I'm using here. And a gated. All right, that's my go-to reverb. So let's keep moving on. Here's one that unfortunately not everyone watching this video will be able to get their hands on, because I believe it's Pro Tools only, unless he's released some VST versions, but it is the Massey tape head. This plugin, again, I've been using this probably close to as long as the SSL channel. It's one of my go-tos, and it does something really special. I can't quite explain it, but it's often one of those plugins that's just kind of like just the magical touch that you need. And often when I'm working on a track and I'm just like, I'm not sure, it's just not quite there, I'll throw up this plugin, and 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's going to give me what I want. So I use it a lot on drums. You can see I've got it on kick and snare here. So sometimes it can be a little subtle. This plugin is actually a lot less subtle than a lot of tape saturation plugins you see. I wouldn't recommend trying to mimic what I'm doing here with a typical tape saturation plugin, because those are usually very, very subtle. This one can be a lot more heavy-handed. So usually in the normal mode here, I'm cranking a little bit of drive to add some body and thickness to a sound, and it kind of makes it a bit darker. But you can also switch it onto the bright mode, and that's going to give you a little bit more, it's going to maintain some of the high-end smack to a sound. You can see on the snare, I usually have it in the middle or bright mode, and even just a little bit of drive is just going to saturate it a little bit, and it can also add a little bit of attack. It's great on drums, obviously, bass, sometimes guitars, and sometimes vocals. Again, it is kind of heavy-handed, so you don't use it everywhere. But one place I found it especially useful is on lead guitars. Let me show you this. This is with the tape head on. Now listen to when I bypass it. Listen to the top end and how much kind of nasty fizz comes out. And then I'll throw it back on, and you'll see how this plugin really just smooths over and cleans up a lead guitar. So that's what I mean when it's kind of a magical plugin. I'm not adding much drive here, but just switching it on, it just somehow absorbs all of that nasty high-end fizz and leaves the tone intact and actually sounding better than it did before. So that is the Massey tape head. If you have Pro Tools, then definitely grab that. It's also very affordable, under $100, and you will use it all the time. All right, let's hit number 7. This is going to be the Waves Rbass plugin. So a lot of these other plugins I've shown you, I've used them across multiple sources. The Rbass is kind of a niche use plugin, but I've used it for the last 10 years on almost every bass track that I've mixed. So that's why I wanted to include it as a top plugin here. Basically what this plugin does is it adds harmonics for the low end. So you set this frequency at, in this mix it's set at 80. So this is going to look at the frequencies below 80 hertz, so those sub frequencies, and it's going to generate harmonics higher up above 80, so more in the low mid range. And that's going to allow your bass to sound more powerful on smaller speakers. So I don't use this super heavy-handedly. I'll A/B it quick. You can see how subtle it is on this bass. Just fills out the low mid a little bit more, and again adds those frequencies so that your bass can cut through on smaller speakers. So if you're not using a plugin like this on your bass yet, I highly recommend it. I think that a lot of problems that people have with heavy bass tracks is that they pump up a lot of sub frequencies, but if you're listening on smaller speakers or earbuds, those frequencies don't come through. So you need to make sure you maintain and enhance some of those lower mid frequencies, 100 hertz and up, in order to actually get the feeling and the reality of a powerful bass tone even on small speakers. So that's the Rbass number 7 on the list. Oh, and it sometimes is also good on toms. I find I have to use it even more subtly on toms, but if your toms sound kind of thin and weak, you can throw a little bit of that on and it's going to kind of beef it up a bit and even kick, although you've got to be careful on that. All right, moving on with the Waves theme here. By the way, the Platinum bundle from Waves is one of the first big plugin bundles I ever bought, so that's why a lot of these have stayed in my workflow for many, many years, but for good reason, because they're all awesome. So this is the Waves C4. They also have the C6 now, which is the 6-band version of this. I usually just use the C4 because I'm usually not using all of the bands. It's usually just doing one specific job. So I love this plugin on bass. You can see I've got all the bands bypassed except for the low end. So 94 hertz and under. I'm able to compress just the sub frequencies by themselves and then use this gain knob to basically turn up or down my subs, which are controlled by the compression. So it's compressing it, and then I can also control the amount of sub I want. Very handy there. And then, it's also useful so many other places. Guitars, especially for heavy guitars, you can check out the other video I've done on the Andy Sneap preset using this plugin. Really useful for controlling low-mid buildup in the guitars. And then sometimes on vocals too. Sometimes on a vocal bus, it can be good to just like smooth off, usually not heavily. Just to gently even out the vocal response across the whole mix. I like it there too, and some other places as well, but that's where it really shines for me. All right, we've only got 2 plugins left in this top 10 list. Number 9 is Joey Sturgis Clip. Now, clipping is something a little bit nuanced, but we've got to kind of do it nowadays with the loudness that's demanded of metal and rock and heavy mixes. And one of the best ways to get that loudness, especially out of your drums without it being just squashed down by limiting and mastering, is using clipping instead. So if you think of a drum transient, it's really fast. If you use a limiter, it's going to push down the power of that transient. But if you use a clipper and it's just shaving off a little bit of the top of that transient, it happens so fast that our ears don't really pick it up as distortion, and it actually makes the drum sound more aggressive, and then you can push them louder without, weakening the punch. So this doesn't work in all genres, but definitely for metal, for heavy music, you can clip your drums a little bit. This JST plugin is a really easy way to do it. I used to have to use, like the built-in gain or trim plugin in Pro Tools and crank it up till it was clipping and then put another one after it to bring it back down. So I was basically like clipping the DAW internally, just straight digital clipping, which work. It's basically the same thing, but this plugin is obviously made for this type of music. It's by Joey Sturgis, so you can just crank up the gain here and trim it down to whatever level you want. And I'm not using this heavy-handed usually. If you do it too much, you can start to feel the crunchiness in the recording, and it can kind of sound kind of nasty and amateur in that way. But I just like to take a little bit off the top of my drums with the clipper there, and that is a really easy kind of 1 or 2 knob way to do it. All right, number 10, we're finishing this off with another Slate plugin. This is Steven Slate Trigger 2. This is the best trigger plugin that I've ever used. Back in the day, we used to use another one called Drumagog. It was not accurate enough. I used to have to print down my triggered drum tracks and then manually go and align almost every single hit myself after. Trigger does an amazing job out of an entire song of like really dense, heavy drums. I'll check, the alignment of the transients, and it's like 99.9% bang on, and it just allows you to blend tons of different samples together. I've made a bunch of my own drum samples here that I use in Trigger, and it's just, the gate is good in it. It's got lots of controls, super easy to use, and super accurate. I have a certain workflow. I don't like to just leave it on a live mix like this. I like to find the sound that I want of the drum samples and then print it down to an audio track. I just like working with stuff that's just decided and concrete. But however you like to use it, this plugin is awesome. It's the best drum triggering plugin you can have, in my opinion. So definitely pick this up if you're sample replacing or enhancing drums at all. It's got lots of great features. You can blend multiple snares together here. These are some of my own. All right, guys, that's a wrap on my top 10 plugins for metal engineers. And again, some of these plugins, you might not use all the time or in the same way if you're working on lighter stuff, but when it comes to heavy music, these ones will serve you well. So definitely check out some trial versions of these if you haven't already. Check out how I'm using some of these plugins in some of my other more detailed mix tutorial videos. And if there's something that I've left off here that you think is essential for metal engineers, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear maybe some of your favorite plugins that I haven't talked about here, or a lot of you guys might have alternative versions to some of the plugins I've mentioned here done by other companies but with similar effects. So drop a comment, let me know what your favorites are. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and turn the alerts on to make sure you know when I've posted a new video. And I've got a free gift for you at metalrecordingguide.com. This is my PDF called The 5 Surprising Truths about producing heavy music that slams. These are all basically the 5 top tips I want to give you that I've learned after a decade of producing worldwide major releases. And I've kind of boiled it down to 5 things that I think will make your recordings and mixes instantly better today if you implement this stuff. So go and download that PDF. That's free for you right now, and that's over at metalrecordingguide.com. You'll get on the email list and get tons of extra free bonus content as well. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.